the Sermon on the Mount, Sermon on the Plain, and the story was recorded by two different people, Matthew and Luke. And they say it just a little bit differently. Now, as I went back, it bothered me. It bothered me that they said it a little bit differently. So I began to look at it a whole lot closer. And Luke, he talks about the blessings and the woes. And he wasn't there. Matthew was there. So I kind of scratched my head and I said, well, who am I gonna count on here? Now, sometimes, as scholars say, that these Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount, is representative of many messages that Jesus preached in his early days in ministry. Luke, as I said, he records it a little bit differently. He calls it Sermon on the Plain. It bothered me, and as I looked at it, I thought, maybe Matthew was an older guy, and kind of like me, doesn't remember it quite as much as Luke does. Luke was a physician. He said in the beginning, I want to give an orderly account. Sometimes you have things in Scripture like that, where you kind of scratch your head, but it's God's Word. It doesn't matter. It matters that Jesus was there, that Jesus spoke. I recently watched Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. And I noticed how strategic he was in choosing the location. He was in the shadow of the Lincoln Memorial. And his opening words were 50 years ago. He starts very deliberately, I think, drawing attention and quoting Abraham Lincoln's legacy. So I wonder, was Jesus very strategic about the location of these opening words called the Beatitudes? He spoke from a mountain, or more likely a mount or a hill. Was that partly because he could project his voice? Was that partly because people that were listening could recall Moses giving the law at Mount Sinai? And he was very calculated with what he said. And he starts off and he said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now that statement raises all kinds of questions, if you really think about it. Who is poor in spirit? What does that mean? Why are they blessed? What is the kingdom of heaven, and how can it be theirs or ours? The word blessed is often used as a religious word, much like holy. But holy is not a religious word. Holy means totally other than, totally different than. So when we're saying God is holy, we're saying God is totally other than any other thing I can imagine. Your word blessed, we talked about it last week in our discussion at the surface, and sometimes people look at it as just being happy. But that doesn't do the word justice. Some years ago, a popular preacher, he wrote a book called The Be Happy Attitudes. Clever title, but it misses the point, I think. The poor, the grief-stricken, the hungry, the persecuted are usually not happy. So, how are they blessed? What does this actually mean? The Greeks used the word blessed to describe the gods, who they viewed as self-sufficient and fully satisfied. The Jews took the word a step further, and they used it to describe God's life, his goodness that bestowed on someone. To be blessed is to enjoy God's approval, his favor. and experience, as we were singing, the fullness that flows from him. Who are poor in spirit? We know who the poor are, materially speaking, right? That the poor are the have-nots. They don't have enough money. They don't have enough food. They don't have enough health care. Poor is the unemployed father who's having trouble finding work and paying the rent. Or the poor single mom who's trying to raise her kids and dealing with COVID. Poor are some of these people that are losing their jobs and they don't have any money to pay the bills. Poor is the good and honest people waiting in line in a refugee camp, waiting to see if they can come into America. And that's not a political statement. There are some good, honest people as well as dishonest ones. In 1983, I was privileged to go to the Philippines and play basketball. And it was the first time that I really saw poverty. And it took my breath away. And then I was told by our guide as we pulled up in our jeepney and there was this man that was begging. Our guide said, yes, some people will cut off limbs so that they can be better beggars. That's poor. That's desperate. That's desperate. I think maybe it's the same thing that Jesus meant when he said the poor in spirit. They are the spiritual have-nots. They don't have enough faith. They don't have enough strength. They don't have enough understanding. The poor in spirit want to have hope, but all they have is a lot of fear. They try to do the right thing, but they find themselves consistently failing. The poor in spirit are the needy. But here's the thing. They know it. They're dependent on God. They need him. And they know they need him. We might even say that they're desperate for him. We're supposed to follow Jesus. Was Jesus desperate? Before we go on, let me ask you a question. Was Jesus poor in spirit? Remember, the goal is that we have to have a change of heart, becoming more like Christ on the inside, and so the inside will flow out. But I'm suggesting that these Beatitudes describe characteristics of a Christ-like heart. Are we prepared to say that Jesus was needy, that he was dependent, that he was desperate? If we look at John chapter 5, verses 19 to 20, the religious leaders, they had just accused Jesus of breaking the Sabbath, of blasphemy, because he claimed that God was his Father. Now listen to Jesus' response. Very truly, I tell you, the Son can do nothing by himself. He can only do what he sees the Father doing, because whatever the Father does, the Son also does. For the Father loves the Son and shows him all he does. Did you hear that? He doesn't say that every so often he gets in over his head and he calls on his Father for help. He doesn't say that most of the time he acts on his own initiative. And sometimes the Father tells him what to do. In no uncertain terms, Jesus confesses his absolute dependence on the Father. The Son can do nothing by himself, but only what the Father sees his Father doing. And this isn't the only time that Jesus talks like that. John chapter 8, he says, "Then you will know that I am he, and I do nothing on my own, but speak just what the Father has taught me." His Father just didn't tell him what to do. His Father directs him what to do. In John chapter 12, he said, "For I did not speak on my own, but the Father who sent me commanded me to say all that I have spoken. So whatever I say is just what the Father told me to say." Jesus emphasizes in John chapter 14, "Don't you believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? The words I speak, I do not speak on my own authority. Rather, it is the Father living in me who is doing his work." In the Gospel of John, you can count 13 times in which Jesus explicitly, emphatically confesses his total and absolute dependence on the Father. He needed the Father. And he knew it. And we see Jesus totally dependent. Desperate, in a sense. Desperate means nearly hopeless, marked by intensity or despair. Do we want to use that word to describe Jesus' spiritual condition? He was desperate when he went into the desert for 40 days to seek the Father's strength. Now, you might say, wait, no, he went to be tempted. He went to seek the Father's strength. Satan did the tempting. Satan went out to him. I think his goal was to commune with his Father. I think his goal was different, but Satan took advantage of it. He was desperate when he was standing in front of Lazarus' grave, and he looked to the heavens and he called on God's power. He was crying. It was his friend. He was desperate when he knew the cross was coming and he saw droplets of blood in the garden. All those things, they sound pretty intense. You know, what's the first recorded word that Jesus ever spoke? Luke chapter 2. "Didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house?" And what were the last recorded words of Jesus before he died? "Father, into my hands I commit my spirit." Jesus lived his entire life, every moment of his life, in complete and desperate dependence on the Father. Because apart from him, he had nothing. I think that's what it means to be poor in spirit. Some of us, we'd rather do it. I'd rather do it myself. But unfortunately, being poor in spirit doesn't come easily to us. We live in the United States, after all. We are independent. We don't like to admit that we need anybody. You know, it only takes a couple of years before a child starts to say, "I can do it myself." And deep down inside, we want to do it ourselves. We want to be independent. We want to be self-sufficient. I'd be the first to admit that. I mean, Adam and Eve started it all. What did they do? They ate the fruit. Why did they eat the fruit? Because they wanted to be self-sufficient. They wanted to be like God. Admitting that we're needy and that we're dependent doesn't come easy to human beings. And it certainly doesn't come easy to well-fed, well-educated, upwardly mobile Americans. This is the land of opportunity. We are a can-do nation. You can dream it, you can do it. You just got to get out there and be self-sufficient. Isn't it interesting? Self-improvement is a billion-dollar industry in this country. Poor in spirit doesn't really play into that. Or on the athletic field. Or in the political arena. Needy, dependent, desperate. Who wants to be that? But I think that's what Jesus was talking about. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who are needy. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom is a life. A lot of times we just kind of think, oh, the kingdom of God is heaven. When I die, I'll get there. I don't think that's what Jesus is saying. I don't think he's saying it's merely a place that we're going to go someday. The kingdom of heaven is a life that's available to us right now. In the midst of COVID, in the midst of this whole political, whatever it is. The kingdom of heaven is simply the rule of God in your heart. That's where the kingdom is. The kingdom is a place where there is peace, there is joy, there is mercy, there's grace, there's goodness, there's love, there's fullness. And Jesus said that life is available now. You got to be poor in spirit. You don't have to do anything. You just have to be poor in spirit. You have to be desperate for him. You have to be dependent on him. You have to come to that place where there's nothing else I have. Are we desperate for God? Sometimes it takes circumstances that places us in a position of desperate. There's a country song. I know that some of you have listened to it, and it was made popular by Carrie Underwood. And Jesus, Take the Wheel. And I don't know if you've listened to the words of that song, but it tells a story of a young single mom who's at the end of her rope. She is financially, emotionally messed up in every way. She's low on gasoline and she's low on faith. And the lyrics say that as she's driving with her kid in the back seat, she hits a patch of ice, I guess, and the car starts to go completely out of control. And in that moment, her life, like her car, which is out of control, she has nowhere else to turn. And she lifts her hands and says, Jesus, take the wheel. I think that's what it means to be poor in spirit. Sometimes our own mistakes, our own hang-ups, they bring us to a place where we become desperate for God. And I think Jesus is saying, that's not a bad place to be. One of the principles based on the Beatitudes, by the way, in Celebrate Recovery is this: to realize that I am not God, that I am powerless to control my tendency to do the wrong thing, and that my life is unmanageable. I think that's what it means to be poor in spirit. And I think there's blessing that comes with that. Why? Why is hitting the rock bottom a blessing? Because it's the beginning of a new life. Because you got nowhere else to look except up. It's the beginning of a new relationship with God. That's what happened to me. My whole world fell apart. And I remember, clear as day, saying, God, I got nowhere else to go. If you want my life, it's yours. Wow. That's what I needed. My whole life changed. I didn't even realize it was changing. I had a roommate that I was living with at the time, and he comes in 2 weeks later to the apartment, and he clicks off the tape that I was listening to, and he points his finger at me and he says, "You're phony, you're fake, nobody can change that much." I was shocked because he was my friend, but I was more shocked the fact that he saw such a change. But it was desperation that brought me to that point. I got nothing. That's what I think being poor in spirit is. It's easy to understand how a single mom, an addict, a soldier in harm's way, that they can come to a place of ending themselves. But sometimes even people who are healthy and happy and walking with God can find themselves in a desperate place. You can't change someone's perspective. They have to change it. You have people you love, but you know they don't love you back, and that hurts, and that's a desperate place to be. You try to change a situation, but it doesn't change. You pray about it, and it doesn't change. You have an health issue that you know is only going to get worse. I think that's what it means to be poor in spirit. Lord, I've got nowhere else to go but to you. I think that's where real transformation starts. Being poor in spirit. Blessed are the humble. Blessed are those who trust. But see, those are things we can aspire to. I can try to trust God more. But once we do that, we're back in that whole self-help mode. I can do it. I can fix it. And I think that this is the point of what Jesus is saying here. Being poor in spirit isn't a virtue to aspire to. It's a condition to confess. Some of us might be in circumstances that leave us no choice but to turn to God. A lot of us, we would say we're okay at the moment. Materially, we have what we need. We're not poor. We're doing okay. We've walked with God for a while. We're feeling good for the most part. And we know there's things going on, but we're not in a desperate place. We're not in a place where we have to say, Jesus, take the wheel. I can't. You know, I teach driving, right? And so what happens is every once in a while, I have a student who decides not to turn the wheel after they make a right-hand turn. So here I am, we're going into somebody's front lawn, or worse, we're going into a tree. And I have to reach over and grab the steering wheel so that we don't go there. I got to be quick about it. Now, every once in a while, I have a student who's pretty strong. And when I grab the wheel, they strengthen their grip, and I can't move the steering wheel. So what I have to do at that point is I have to hit the brake on my side really hard. And that's happened a couple times. I stopped inches from a telephone pole. Sometimes God has got to hit the brakes with us because we won't let him take the wheel. And we strengthen our grip because we want to do it our way. I think what Jesus is saying to us is when we're in a desperate place, when we're desperate for him, when we take our hands off and say, Jesus, take the wheel. That's when he can do his greatest work in our lives. That's when he can change our hearts. God does that with some of us. But wouldn't it be great that we could take our hands off the wheel on our own and we don't need the brakes hit? Some of us might be poor in spirit. Some of us, we want to be. But I think that's what Jesus meant here. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And I think that's what we need to be. desperate for him, I think that's when the change in us and out of us will happen. And we could be that way because of what Jesus did on the cross. I mean, we sang about it this morning. He gave us everything. And we need to give him everything. Especially letting him control our lives. Blessed are the poor in spirit. I think Jesus got everybody's attention with that statement. But I don't think a lot of people understand what that means. Let's close in a word of prayer, and then we'll celebrate communion together. Father, thank you. Thank you that you were an example to us. And I pray, Father, that we would come to a place of being desperate for you. I pray that we would come to a place of taking our hands off the wheel of our own life and allowing you to control us. Father, show us how to be completely and wholly dependent as Jesus was on you. In Jesus' name, amen.